At the very end of the 18th century, Jacques Garnerin from France ended up in a Hungarian prison. Turns out this was a place that served well for his creativity. It was in prison that he invented the parachute. With so much time in his hands, he was able to make good use of what would have been a horrible experience. So what he was trying to do when he was going about his invention was to execute a prison break. He used a dome-shaped cloth to get up on the high walls and make a run for it. Turns out he was never successful at his attempt. That said, let's see how other attempts to use the parachute fared. When I think of parachutes landing, I think of cats and how graceful they land with seemingly zero impact. Check out these soft landings. Their balance and poise are on another level. They've fallen from up to 32 stories with a 90% survival rate. They don't always get injured, by the way. For humans, some of these falls would be fatal instantly. Let's have a look at some which were not. But before we get started, be sure to smash the like button, subscribe and click the notification bell for more such amazing content. Alcamade was an American airman who survived a high fall from a height of 21,648 feet during World War II. That's pretty high. When the plane was tumbling to its fall, Meiji discovered his parachute was torn and there was no way he could survive. The pilot blacked out from the loss of oxygen and then a miracle happened. He fell on a glass roof of a railroad station. Crashing into that roof saved his life. He suffered 28 shrapnel wounds, bone fractures as well as serious injuries to his nose, kidney and lungs. But he was alive. Whoa, what luck! There's more. Vesna Vulovic, a flight attendant, is the only person who miraculously survived the mid-air explosion of a jetliner over Czechoslovakia in 1972 after plummeting thousands of feet onto a snowy hill. Miss Vulovic's improbable story began on January 26, 1972 in Copenhagen, where she was assigned to a Yugoslav Airlines crew for a flight to Belgrade. She recalled that she would not have been there. Another flight attendant, also named Vesna, was supposed to have been on the flight. An hour into the flight, the plane, a DC-9, blew up over the Czech village of Srpska Kamenice. As others were believed to have been sucked out of the jet into sub-freezing temperatures, Miss Vulovic remained inside part of the shattered fuselage, wedged in by a food cart as it plunged. Trees broke the fall of the fuselage section, and snow on the hill cushioned its landing. The Guinness Book of World Records says the plunge was from a height of 33,000 feet, the longest recorded fall without a parachute. The Czech authorities concluded that explosives in a suitcase had detonated and tore the jet apart, but an investigation by two reporters in Prague in 2009 challenged that account. They concluded that the DC-9 was mistakenly shot down by the Czechoslovak Air Force at an altitude of only 800 meters, or about 2,625 feet. Miss Vulovic was the only one of 28 passengers and crew members to survive, but just barely. She suffered a skull fracture and broke her legs. 3 vertebrae were broken and she was temporarily paralyzed from the waist down and in a coma for a time. She had no memory of the flight or her descent. Nicholas Alcamade was an English tail gunner who survived from falling 18,000 feet after a plane crash. His story, however, does not end there. After the crash, he was also drifted at sea for a very long time. Nicholas Stephen Alcamade was born in Norfolk, UK in 1922. When World War II broke out, he became a rear gunner on Avro Lancaster bombers with 115 Squadron. His crew had successfully completed 14 missions when on the night of 24th of March 1944, they were ordered to attack Berlin. Their aircraft was nicknamed Werewolf and was one of 811 planes that were to attack the German capital that night. Alcamade and his 6 crewmen carried out their mission as planned, but on the return flight they encountered strong winds that unfortunately blew them southward towards the Ruhr, where there was a large number of anti-aircraft defences. The luck that had been with them for the 14 previous missions didn't hold. Just before midnight, the Werewolf was attacked by a Junkers fighter. The bomber's wing and fuselage were hit and immediately it burst into flames. Alcamade, who was the rear gunner, tried to shoot back, but already the windows of his turret had been blown out and fire was starting to engulf the entire rear of the plane. The pilot, James Newman, knew they were done for and the plane was going down. He gave the order to take their parachutes and jump to safety. There wasn't enough room in the rear gunner position to store a parachute, so Alcamade opened the door that separated him from the rear of the plane to access the storage locker that held his parachute. It was then he began to realize how much trouble he was in. The entire back section of the plane was on fire, and to his dismay, so was his parachute. The heat was immense. Almost immediately his oxygen mask began to melt, and he felt his hands becoming engulfed in flames. He shut the door, but the raging fire began to burn hotter. Nicholas Alcamade was out of options. "I had no doubt at all this was the end of the line," he told Leicester Mercury years later. "The question was whether to stay in the plane and fry or jump to my death. I decided to jump and make a quick, clean end of things. I backed out of the turret and somersaulted away." So out he went, headed from 18,000 feet above the earth to the ground at 120 miles per hour. He lost consciousness during the descent, which would have been the end of this story. Except 3 hours later, Alcamade, now safely lying on the ground, opened his eyes. That said, some people are quite lucky to make these falls look like a piece of cake. Rick Charles dived into a pond from a height of 170 feet, and guess what? He stayed alive. Let's just say that's a big jump. So water in a glass is soft. However, when you fall from such a great height, it's like you're hitting cold, hard pavement. So the odds lie on how you jump, and the likelihood of getting a concussion afterwards is high. You can get that concussion if you land badly diving from a 33-foot tower. That said, the danger usually checks in when the height is above 249 feet. 95 to 98% of such falls are fatal. Alright, back up. If you fall in water, it's one thing. When you fall on dry ground, it's a whole different ballgame. Whether it's grass, asphalt, concrete or snow, how it goes down, no pun intended, all comes back to how high the fall is. The maximum height humans can jump from is 151 feet, and please don't go experimenting. Scientists have already gone ahead to find out that the person who fell out of the plane was at an aircraft flight altitude at 6 to 7.5 miles. It causes the air to be too thin. This means the chances for someone to remain conscious are very low. While up there, a human is hit by an extreme case of oxygen starvation and total blackout, and the only way someone comes back to their senses is by the time they're 3.7 to 4.3 miles above the ground, at which point they only have about 2 minutes before impact. To fully understand how survivors survive, researchers took a close look at their stories and added calculations according to the data they found. So the best plan is to slow down the fall by spreading your arms and legs to the side like a squirrel. Also, if you can aim, as we found out before, landing on water is not a good choice. Better to fall on bushes, trees or some tall grass, maybe even snow. These are some of the landing strips that can save your life. Also, ensure that you fall in the correct body position. In this case, the best position just before impact is feet together and heels up and flex the knees. That's how skydivers land, and it's sad that so many people got hurt while landing before this discovery was made. Luke Akins jumped from an airplane at an altitude of 4.6 miles and landed on a net without any parachute. There were, however, very few survivors of the plane crash. Over the last 5 years, an average of 345 people died in aircraft accidents each year, so maybe it would be a superb idea to have parachutes for each of the passengers. It would be just a slight addition to the life jackets that are under each seat, but when you think about it, how hard would it be for everyone to get their parachute and put it on, all that panic and exit safety in the pandemonium of a plane crash? You know what would be a good idea? To have parachutes on the entire plane. Makes it easier for the plane to slow down and slow everything down. There are parachutes set up for some smaller planes, so maybe try to have the same arrangement for a Boeing? It would be a super expensive affair, and the fabric to make that kind of parachute would be humongous. To be precise, what it would take is 21 parachutes the size of football fields to rescue a Boeing 747 with about 500 people on board. An aircraft carrying that much weight wouldn't take off. Maybe the trick is in creating something a little less heavy. A little fellow named Jeremy Cricket did that. So did Mary Poppins, with her magic umbrella. Well, only a special umbrella could hold that strong. Eric Rohner tried his luck with a giant umbrella-like structure that was blown away by a strong wind. Lucky for Eric, he also had a parachute as a backup. Maybe he should have tried something with more technological pizzazz, like a jetpack from GTA. Not to say that these games are unrealistic. Jetpacks have already been tried and tested, and they can be used to deliver food. How did people invent parachutes? Good question. Leonardo da Vinci could not just wake up one morning thinking of how he could create something that would make him fly. Well, this was pre-soaring and descending. So da Vinci came up with a parachute sketch. He was, however, not the first one to come up with the idea of a parachute. Over time, more modern designs did surface. As mentioned a little earlier, Jacques Garnerin was indeed the first to come up with the entire parachute idea and design. He tested the experiment with different heights, starting with 0.6, then 1.2, then 1.5 miles. He had no idea that his genius idea would be used in a more mainstream way in the 19th century. They were mostly used at the circus, and performers would hang from the basket of a hot air balloon at 0.6 miles high and would drop with a parachute for the finale. Parachutes went through a few reinventions over a few decades to make them as functional as they are today, especially as a tool that guarantees survival. Gleb Kitonikov was a theatre actor who witnessed the death of a pilot, Leo Matsovic, during an air show at St. Petersburg in 1910. He came up with a couple of prototype parachutes. He did the test with cars instead of pilots, but he got his idea in history as one of the pioneers of parachutes. This seems like a weird thing, but believe it or not, it went on to be used to stop racing cars. Now that's pretty cool. Another invention from Gleb was the drogue parachute, which is to date used for aviation and when the runway is wet or covered in ice. This is quite an interesting topic. The more we get into it, the more exciting things I discover. Turns out parachutes are also used on submarines, and why not? These parachute inventors are rich when it comes to imagination. How about we stop there? Would you get into a parachute situation? I'm curious. Do let us know in the comments section. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please let me know by clicking the like button. Do share, write a comment, and don't forget to subscribe so you can catch up my next video.